The stranger was standing in the rain with one hand pressed against his bleeding forehead, and for a few seconds, I almost drove past him. I had every reason to keep going. It was late, the road was nearly empty, my phone battery was dying, and I had already had the worst day of my life. But something inside me made me slam on the brakes. I didn't know it then, but opening that passenger door would change the direction of my life forever. Before we continue, if you believe that one small act of kindness can create a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes the smallest decision we make becomes the most important decision of our lives. That night, I was driving home after losing my job. My name is Daniel, and for the past 8 years, I had worked at the same construction company. I had spent years believing that if I worked hard enough, life would eventually reward me. But that afternoon, my manager had called me into his office and told me the company was cutting staff. My position was gone. There was no warning, no sympathy, just a cardboard box filled with the few personal things I had kept at work. Worse than losing my job was knowing that my rent was due in 5 days and my mother was depending on me to help pay for her medication. I drove for almost an hour without knowing where I was going. Rain hammered against the windshield, turning the highway into a blur of headlights and black pavement. I felt like everything I had worked for was disappearing at once. Then, near an old gas station, I saw him. He stood beneath a broken streetlight wearing a thin gray jacket soaked completely through. One shoe was missing, and his face was covered with blood. He wasn't waving desperately or chasing cars. He simply stood there, looking exhausted, almost as if he had stopped expecting anyone to care. I slowed down. My first thought was danger. My second was that I didn't have enough money to help anyone. But when lightning flashed across the sky, I saw the fear in his eyes. I pulled over. He approached cautiously, and when I unlocked the passenger door, he climbed inside without saying a word. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely fasten the seatbelt. I handed him a clean cloth from the glove compartment and asked where he needed to go. He looked at me for a long moment before quietly giving me an address across town. The entire drive was strangely silent. I turned the heater toward him and drove slowly through the storm. After several minutes, he finally told me his name was Michael. He explained that his car had broken down several miles away. While walking toward the nearest town, he had slipped on the wet pavement and hit his head. His phone had been destroyed when he fell, leaving him stranded without a way to call anyone. When we reached the address, I expected him to thank me and disappear. Instead, he stared at the house as if he was afraid to go inside. It was a small, aging home with peeling paint and a porch that looked like it hadn't been repaired in years. Michael remained in the car for several seconds before asking if I could wait. I agreed. He walked to the front door, knocked, and an elderly woman opened it. The moment she saw him, she began crying. She pulled him into her arms, and I watched from the car as they held each other in the rain. A few minutes later, Michael returned. He told me the woman was his mother. He had been away for nearly 3 years. I didn't ask why. But then he told me something that made me realize this wasn't simply a story about a stranded man. Michael had left home after his younger brother died. He blamed himself for the accident and believed his mother blamed him too. Shame had consumed him. He moved from city to city, taking temporary jobs and avoiding everyone who loved him. That evening, after receiving news that his mother was seriously ill, he finally decided to come home. Then his car broke down. He had been walking for hours when I found him. I drove away that night thinking I had done nothing extraordinary. I had simply picked up a stranger. But 3 weeks later, Michael appeared at my apartment. I almost didn't recognize him. He was clean-shaven, wearing a simple blue shirt, and carrying a folder under his arm. He thanked me again and asked how I was doing. I reluctantly told him the truth. I had lost my job and was struggling to keep up with my mother's medical expenses. Michael listened without interrupting. Then he opened the folder. He was the owner of a small construction company. I remember laughing because I thought he was joking. But he wasn't. He offered me a job. Not charity. A real job. He told me he had built his company from nothing and needed someone he could trust to manage a new project. He said that anyone who was willing to stop for a bleeding stranger in the middle of a storm was someone he wanted beside him. I accepted. For the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The job wasn't easy. I worked long hours, made mistakes, learned new skills, and slowly rebuilt my confidence. Michael became more than my employer. He became my friend. But the biggest change happened in his own life. He began visiting his mother every weekend. He repaired her porch, painted her house, and planted flowers outside her window. He didn't erase the past, but he stopped running from it. One evening, months after that rainy night, Michael and I stood outside his mother's house watching her laugh with her grandchildren. He looked at me and said that if I hadn't stopped that night, he might never have made it home. I told him that if he hadn't come into my car, I might never have found my own way forward either. Because losing my job had made me believe my life was falling apart. But sometimes life doesn't fall apart. Sometimes it rearranges itself. The road I thought was taking me toward failure had actually been taking me toward a stranger who would become my friend, my business partner, and one of the greatest blessings of my life. A year later, Michael and I opened a small community program through the company. We began helping people who were struggling to find work after losing everything. We provided training, temporary employment, and sometimes simply a meal and someone willing to listen. We called the program Second Mile. Because we believed kindness shouldn't stop when the first mile becomes inconvenient. Looking back, I still remember that night clearly. The rain. The broken streetlight. The empty road. The man standing alone with blood on his face. And I remember the moment my hand reached for the door lock. That tiny decision changed 2 lives. Maybe that's the lesson we forget. We keep waiting for huge opportunities to make a difference, believing kindness has to be expensive or extraordinary. But sometimes kindness is simply stopping. Sometimes it is listening. Sometimes it is giving someone a ride when you are hurting too. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may be having their own difficult night. And before you go, I want you to leave one special comment: I will stop for someone who needs me. Because somewhere tonight, someone may be standing alone on the side of the road, wondering if anyone will care. And maybe the next person who stops won't just change their life. Maybe they'll change their own forever, too.